Hi, and welcome to JumpCloud's webinar series. Today we'll be talking about Google and the identity management crisis. We'll be talking specifically about Google's role in the transformation of identity management in cloud-forward businesses like yours. I'm Greg Keller, the company's Chief Product Officer, and I'll be taking you through this webinar and demonstration today related to Google and identity management. We'll talk about a few things here in the next few minutes, but I like to begin presentations by providing a historical context. So we will talk a little bit about the history of directories to really give you context on where we are today with respect to identity. We'll talk about Google's impact on modern IT, especially with the dawn of Google Apps, and of course Google Identities at the core driving a lot of authentication needs in your enterprises. We'll also go deeper into just exactly where that breaks down for organizations so you can understand the risks. With that understood, we'll jump into JumpCloud's solution for managing a directory as a service behind Google's identity management. And lastly, we'll be walking you through a demonstration of just exactly how JumpCloud interoperates with Google to effectively create a proper backing directory for Google Apps. So as mentioned, first, let's talk some history. Let's talk about directories. And specifically, we're going to talk about Active Directory. So to date, roughly 16 years ago, an amazing piece of software was born from the Microsoft team that really emanated from a lot of work in the LDAP field and X500 field, which was the launch of Windows Server 2000, and within it, the capability for domain control services, thus Active Directory was born. And for organizations in the late 90s, early 2000s that instituted Active Directory, this quite literally was and in many, many cases is the gold standard. It's an incredible piece of software, one that is absolutely pristine, especially when using the Microsoft stack exclusively. One directory-backed identity could be manufactured and created and managed and stored and emitted when you utilized a Microsoft stack with AD at the center of it. A single vendor, Microsoft, could literally run an enterprise from the authentication needs of employees to their resources like their Windows workstations to the Ethernet-based networks that gave them access to file share servers, among many other things. This also, over the last 16 years, created a countless ecosystem. I mean, thousands of companies building add-ons and reporting mechanisms and tools that effectively related to Active Directory to help IT administrators really be more productive with the AD suite, especially when you are attempting to use non-Microsoft related tools. Primarily, this product, Active Directory, was an employee-facing directory for infrastructure management. Again, Windows endpoints and workstations for employees, their file share servers, and the applications that other employees would use, be it ERP systems to run-of-the-mill applications that would be installed pre-SaaS days, mind you, on desktops. Anyone on this webinar then knows during the course of the late 2000s, a transformation happened. And that was the dawn of, as we say here internally, XS, which is the as-a-service movement of taking what was once on-premise installed or managed infrastructure or software, and if there was a capability to do so, vendors were born to move it to the cloud. Obviously, the most archetypal example of that is Salesforce. I distinctly recall our sales VP of a company that I worked for in San Francisco really laughing at the concept of Salesforce. We worked right down the street from the first offices of Salesforce, and when they put their sales software signs out on their door with the Ghostbuster sign through it saying, "No more software," we sort of laughed at that as other San Francisco-based software vendors. Guess what? Everyone was wrong. It is secure. The cloud can be a force multiplier. And as you'll see, if it can be moved to the cloud and managed as a service to reduce and obviate the overhead associated with a resource, it will be and is. But this caused a lot of chaos for IT admins. Frankly, it's a full and archetypal example of decentralization. Infrastructure as a service, as an example, servers that you used to have in a closet or in a small rack in your office were now not there. They suddenly gravitated to the cloud, floated to the cloud, so to speak. Amazon Web Services and others created the concept of cloud computing, as you all know, and I'm sure you all use. So in this case, it was an incredible use of taking commodity hardware that you used to physically manhandle and having all of the simplicity of just firing up and spinning up servers at your leisure very cost effectively in the cloud. Same thing with SaaS applications, as mentioned. We saw, all of us, like in the 90s, 2000s, there wasn't an email system in use other than Lotus Notes than Microsoft Exchange. But guess what? Gmail came along. And the last 5 companies I've worked for, I have not used an Exchange-based system. It's all been Gmail because of the simplicity of it. Same thing for CRMs. We already talked about Salesforce. The other thing that happened was the sort of decentralization of your workforce. So, again, being 20 plus years in the industry, of course, I can't, every experience I had, I would walk to my office, I would secure card in, sit at my cubicle or my desk or my office, and I would work. But then even I worked remotely. Family grew up, we moved away, and it became a huge strain for our IT force as guys like me and teams like me were moving independently to integrate with the mothership. So VPNs and all these tunnels had to be created to hit our domain controller so I could be authorized to still hit my servers, my file shares, etc. back in San Francisco. Also, we saw the move from predominant Windows infrastructure to a disparate, heterogeneous environment especially for employee computing. Again, over the 90s into the 2000s, late 2000s, you'd get issued a Windows laptop and that was it. You wouldn't expect anything else. You occasionally saw a MacBook, but that was kind of used by, an art guy or a designer. Now it's, again, ubiquitous. It is the predominant and expected piece of hardware in most up-and-coming organizations. You get issued your MacBook just like you did your Windows machine, and you're on your way. And finally, mobility, the capability of having the power of the internet in your pocket and how that all relates to accessing corporate information. That's causing another level of itself in decentralization. All of this has created, over the last decade, a independent silo mechanism of identities, different identities for logging into your machine, to your SaaS apps, to the Wi-Fi as an example, and we'll talk about more of that in a minute. So with that historical context understood and the boon of infrastructure as a service and software as a service movements and how that decentralized things, let's talk about Google and its impact. So Google really represents what we call and what the industry calls a fairly classic example of a cloud-forward company. When you're implementing Google, you likely began life as a small startup. It quite literally was the basis of your first quote-unquote directory. You spin up a company, you get some funding, you got 5, 10, 15, 20 people. Maybe you have an LDAP server, certainly not for employee-facing things, but rather for, Linux authentication for your sysadmins and the tech guys, so to speak. So Google, for the rest of your employee populace, was it. That was your directory. It gave you authentication to the things that really mattered for your productivity, your email, your Google Apps infrastructure and collaboration tools. You could use your Google sign-in to OAuth into other applications. And if you were pretty savvy, you probably adopted some single sign-on solutions at the time, which could integrate with Google and other directories if you had them, but would get you by for signing into SaaS-based applications. So life is good. But in these organizations, there's nothing on-prem. I mean, I've lived this, like I'm sure many of you have. A typical office now, at least the last 5 startups that I've worked for, all looked and felt the same. Fleets of MacBooks, like Cisco Meraki wireless access points, no cubes, all sort of open office space, and everything else is up in the cloud. And in many cases, yes, we are completely remote. The cloud enables that level of productivity with no hair pulling, no VPNs, unless, of course, you're sort of a deep technical guy who needs to get secure access to cloud infrastructure. Then, of course, it's necessary. But largely, it's an incredibly efficient way to do things. But remember that decentralized chaos stuff that I was talking about, that Active Directory experienced? Well, Google is also going through its same yet new layer of decentralization and identity siloing. Let's sort of talk through that a bit. So we know that Google is phenomenal at the emission of identity to various services, both services for itself, Google Apps as an example, but also OAuth to get out to other sort of application infrastructure in the cloud, Salesforce, and so on. But what about all the other stuff an employee needs access to? What about their machines, as an example? Those Mac machines that we were just talking about. Does Google authenticate that? No. Or Linux? Of course not. How can an employee use their Google identity and get them authenticated, for example, to their wireless access point? I guarantee virtually everyone that's listening to this presentation has the following scenario. You walk into your new job, they hand you your MacBook or Windows or whatever, and you ask the question, how do I get on the Wi-Fi? Oh yeah, it's written on the whiteboard in the conference room. The SSID and the password is shared. Total security posture, bad call. So you want to, again, as we'll talk about, get into a better posture of making sure your employees are using their core identities to sign into networks, especially Wi-Fi, so that they can be individually removed from networks in case of rogue employee scenarios. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. So when you sort of look at the impact of Google and not touching the quote-unquote rest of an employee's infrastructure, what are those impacts? First, let's talk about security. And we touched on this just a second ago. But it relates to poor identity provisioning and access control, which means you can get a Google identity only so far. It can get up to the cloud, to other SaaS apps. OAuth is great. But again, the machine stuff is really difficult. So it puts a strain on the IT admin or whoever is onboarding the employee to manage multiple independent accounts for the employee, their Salesforce account, their MacBook account, their Wi-Fi, if they're using an individual password in some way, and of course, other various services. So it's very hard, but take that into context. That's the onboarding problem. Let's talk about the offboarding problem. You got, some sales guy, Joey Bag of Donuts, who effectively has gone rogue. You need to fire him. How quickly can you offboard that employee from their removal of access to their Wi-Fi to ensuring they can't log into their machine, to Salesforce, and so on? How quickly can that be done? And those are considerations that you have to think through when you don't have a directory sitting behind something like Google. Other areas related to security are password enforcement. So while Google does a good job of saying, hey, you have a new account, or we're going to force you to log in and create your own password, it does very little in terms of keeping passwords fresh, enforcing complexity over the password, using complex, multi-case, multi-character sorts of passwords, among many other things. So Google doesn't support that. You have to go to other sort of management solutions. Better Cloud is a great example of a tool or a cloud-based solution that manages those problem spaces of Google itself, but it's not managing the core identity, as it were, for other resource allocation and access. So you need to have that in mind too. Also, very limited monitoring alerting. It'll tell you when and if, in a very cool way, mind you, when it feels as if there has been a breach to your account. That is pretty cool. But other sorts of access, not just Google, but when a brute force attempt is happening with an identity on a Linux server that's associated with the Google account, and or Wi-Fi and or anything for that matter, it only does itself. So that's an important aspect. Google will only monitor itself. Let's also talk now about workstation management and impacts there. So Google, again, OAuth and OpenID, et cetera, are great protocols, to leverage, the Google sign-in with, but it's limited protocol support to act authoritatively to the rest of your infrastructure. Again, think, man, I've got a Jira application that I still have installed, quote unquote, on-prem. Could be in a cloud server, but it's my installed managed version of Jira. And I got yet another individual login for that thing. So, man, I wish Google had an LDAP emission layer so I could use my Google identity and use it to, for the identical sign-in for Jira. Can't happen. So you have that sort of thing. Same thing happens for, LDAP for signing into Linux servers, etc. But again, getting access to those machines with a single common authoritative identity is extremely important. So let's move into the JumpCloud solution. And we've carefully looked at this problem space for a couple of reasons. One, because we are Google customers. Unabashedly, we think very highly of the technology, and it creates amazing productivity for us as a growing organization. But our company, like you, like many others, suffer from the same thing. We cannot, especially with JumpCloud security posture, sort of manage the risk of multiple independent identities for our employees. And I don't care if it's a salesperson or one of our engineers or DevOps or infrastructure guys. We can't. It's got to be unified. So we looked at that problem because we needed to solve it for ourselves. And JumpCloud, in part, was created because of these problem spaces and being an authoritative directory that's independent of any vendor, meaning Microsoft, Google, IBM, etc. We don't care what resource you want to use. Again, it could be any number of things, but we saw that there was a big vacant hole behind Google. Let's talk about how we're solving that problem. So first of all, JumpCloud is a directory in the traditional sense of an authoritative directory. Our identities are the core identities of your employees. We centralize that so you can have one place to manage the identity to onboard and one place to offboard, regardless of the infrastructure. This diagram is representative of that. We sit in the middle, up in the cloud securely in your own sort of domain of JumpCloud. And that identity is emitted to all kinds of infrastructure, from, again, infrastructure as a service to your IT resources in your offices, like your wireless access points, to applications that connect to an identity, our identity, such as LDAP, Radius, and other. And of course, our area of expertise is really rooted in workstation management. So that single identity will also be the same one your employees log into on their MacBooks and Windows machines and Linux for that matter. But on the left side of the screen, you can see we leverage Google as basically a spoke, and we are the hub. We can import identities, manage them, and then of course export them anew, provisioning them when you onboard employees and pushing them into Google. Fully as the central source of a Google identity. From JumpCloud, you can suspend Google guys, you can reactivate them, etc. And we'll be showing you this in a live fire demonstration in just a moment. So now's the time. Let's kind of walk through JumpCloud in a live fire demonstration and show you exactly how this works in a true sort of use case driven demonstration. So let's have a look. First place I'd like to go is JumpCloud, just to sort of give you a visual sort of confirmation of what the product looks like. This is the administrative console. Just for the purposes of understanding the kind of core components of it before we get into the real live fire demonstration, this is how it breaks down. JumpCloud's directory as a service manages your users. And we manage, again, the authoritative version of these users. And from here, you emit them through lots of varied protocols and to systems via the agent, which we'll get to in a second. But again, this is the beacon, the heartbeat of your employee's identity sitting in the middle of your enterprise. Systems, and we manage Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X endpoints are all managed through the installation of a lightweight agent. The agent is tiny, hyper secure, and think of it as the tether back to the JumpCloud domain you're controlling up in the cloud to control these devices remotely. Meaning you can allocate, bind, as we like to say, user accounts to those machines or remove them at any time. You can run scripts and commands against those endpoints, among many other things, just by especially events, so you can pull back security logs from those machines, all by having the agent installed on the machine. We also, as mentioned, offer Radius as a service. This quite literally is the spinning up of Radius servers on your behalf up in the cloud at your request. We do this in a global edge network, so there is no latency, and this will provide your employee base a mechanism to manage their core identities and get signed into various resources like wireless access points or VPNs that use Radius, all through JumpCloud's Radius as a service. I mentioned LDAP as a service, and we'll be sort of walking through that in a second as well. So let's take you through how this all works. And one of the products that I'm going to jump out of JumpCloud here in a second, and I'm going to bring you into a product, given most of you who are interested in Google probably use Google that are on this call or are considering it. This is the Google Administrative Dashboard. So many of you have seen this. I have created a user. I have a list of users here in my JumpCloud domain here, and I have created this this user called Carrie Field, and it's a newly created user. We can assume that this is an active end user of Google Apps in your enterprise, or in my case, the JumpCloud. This is our fictitious sort of alter ego we use for demonstrations. So Carrie Field is an active user in Google. Let's go back into JumpCloud, and our demonstration will be this. I need to consume that identity. I need to then allocate that identity to a number of resources, and we're going to do this all in just a matter of quite literally 2 minutes. So first, let's import that identity. We'll go into directories, and notice here we have a full Active Directory synchronization. I don't have that set up right now, but I am working with Google Apps, which I already have using integrated using a super admin cred. This is a API-driven integration. There is no need for a middle tier server such as GADS, Google Apps Directory Sync. All of that goes away with our integration. It's direct, secure API handshakes that are persisted. So once it's set up, you never have to touch it. So let's import our Carrie Field guy. Here he is. And I will import him, and great. That quickly, we've got Carrie now inside of the directory. Let's go take a look at him. So let me search for Carrie. Cool. Here he is amongst the sea of users, but I filtered down to him. And what I would like to do is to activate him. So Carrie was imported, so I now have that sort of first taste of the identity inside of JumpCloud. I'm reusing, so to speak, the identity that was created in Google. I don't have to recreate him in JumpCloud. I've just imported the body of the identity. But I need to activate him. There's 2 methods. First, which is what I'm showing you here, is sort of like the Active Directory route. I'm going to be an admin here, which I am, and I'm going to administratively give Carrie a password, and in doing so activate the account, which I've done. The second method, incidentally, is to simply fire off an email, which the product will do automatically to Carrie's inbox to say, Carrie, you have now been invited to join your Google identity to the JumpCloud core identity. Reset your password. Moving forward, you never have to do it in Google again. You can just do it in JumpCloud, and it will update that password across all of your resources, including Google. So in this case, we've got Carrie imported, we've got Carrie activated. So the first thing that I need to get Carrie on is his machine. So notice here, I'm looking at Carrie's details. I'm going into system bindings, and I have a Windows machine in the background. It's a VM, but it could be an actual, physical machine. In fact, this machine could be quite literally in Topeka, Kansas, while I'm administering from, Oregon. It doesn't matter. It's all remote. As long as this green checkbox is here, it means JumpCloud is feeling and receiving a heartbeat from that machine. You're good to go. And I will select the machine that I'm going to bind Carrie's account to, and I will save it. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to go into the machine, and right now I'm logged in as an administrator. As you can see, admin user here. And I'm going to sign out. And the interval time for a new user account to sort of land and sort of get activated on the machine is between 60 and 90 seconds. It's typically faster, just depends on a few variables, sort of when the interval happens to when the machine is checking to bring in or add in new users. Let's take a look. So I'm going to freshen up the machine and let us see now, and voila. Here is Carrie, already delivered. Let's log in as Carrie. So notice here, I'm going to type in the password. I know you can't see it, but I'm typing in the password that I gave Carrie in JumpCloud, thus the JumpCloud password. And just like that, Carrie's machine is now provisioned. So there are a number of other resources. This is just one mechanism and how quickly you can start to provide out and allocate resources to a JumpCloud managed identity. And we did that all from consuming the Google identity and quite literally putting it on a Windows machine in this case. Could have been Mac, could have been Linux. But now moving forward, every resource connected to this JumpCloud account, including Carrie's Google account, is all managed via this singular authoritative JumpCloud identity. So with that, folks, I would like to say thank you so much for attending this webinar. We are always appreciative of feedback. And if you'd like to, please feel free to do that to me directly. I'm Greg at JumpCloud.com, and I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much, and hope you all have a great work week.